Okay. Good morning, people. Welcome to welcome to Wednesday. Yeah, I meant the good catch there, Jimmy. I meant 8:20, not 10:20. 10:20 would be impossible because class is over. But sometimes I get confused because it's still early in the morning and my coffee hasn't started working yet. Um, yeah. Casey, good morning to you. Karen, good morning. Mashid is here. Good morning, Mashid. Good morning, Jimmy. Krish is here. Good morning, Krish. Good morning, Jenna. Good evening to you, Erica. And good morning, Duong. Yeah, so what we'll do today, I'll just review very quickly what we talked about with religious oppression yesterday and the day before. And then the videos that you watched, of course, will dive into classism. And again, we don't have a ton of time to deal with classism. And so it'll just be sort of a scratching of the surface kind of thing. Yeah, so yesterday you will remember, just as a quick sum up, religious oppression was where we have systemic inequalities between different religions in society. And so again, I just used Canada as an example, and the example I used, or the what we talked about, was the fact that Canada is mostly Christian, and so Christians are the dominant group, and non-Christians are in the minoritized group, right? And that, to some extent, that does include people who are atheist or agnostic, so people who are not strongly religious either way. But it also includes other religions as well, and we kind of pointed out specifically Muslims and Jewish people and Sikhs, because sometimes they are more visible to society than other religions might be. And so we talked a little bit about Quebec's religious symbols law and how they banned all religious symbols while working for the provincial government or receiving government services. And we said that even though it appeared that that was equal, because it applied to all religions, of course, not all religions require their people to wear religious symbols. And so it actually only applies to a very small group of religions, small group of people. And those are people that are already minoritized. Those are people who are already disadvantaged in Canadian society. And so we read an article, and we heard from a number of women who were suffering real consequences because of this law, in terms of feeling like they didn't belong, feeling like they were feeling like they didn't belong. Some of them had been subject to harassment after that. Some of them were having their careers negatively affected, or they were finishing school and found that they wouldn't be able to find a job in the province that they lived in and were born in unless they remove their religious symbols, right? And again, the Quebec government is able to pass a law like this because of the notwithstanding clause in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. But without that notwithstanding clause, that law does violate people's right to religious expression. I'm not sure if we said yesterday or the day before, but actually that that law has been challenged, and I suspect it will make its way to the Supreme Court as well. It has to go to the Quebec Supreme Court first, and so there's a few kind of levels of court you have to go through, but I suspect it will find its way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will rule on it. And once they do, that will be the final decision. We also talked a little bit yesterday about Trinity Western University. Trinity Western is here in BC, in Langley, and they had their students and staff sign a community covenant, right? And so that was an agreement whereby certain behavior was prohibited, but we said that that covenant disadvantaged non-married people and disadvantaged LGBTQ people. And so, again, the community covenant was challenged as well. It went to the Supreme Court of Canada, and the Supreme Court said, actually, the covenant does disadvantage LGBTQ people, right? It creates a barrier for them in getting their education, and that's not in the public interest. And so Trinity Western University was forced to do something about it, right? And so what they did was they made the community covenant optional, so you could sign it if you wanted to. But we saw in the video yesterday that there were some Christians, and the president of Trinity Western University were upset with the Supreme Court's decision, right? They felt that their right to religious freedom and freedom of religious expression, Christians felt that had been violated. But as I tried to point out yesterday, none of their freedoms have really been curtailed or limited in any way, right? Christians are still free to go to the university, they're still free to study law, and they're still free to sign the covenant and follow all the rules within, right? That is their right to do so. But where they cross the line, and where anyone can cross the line, is when you start discriminating against other people, right? And so the community covenant did discriminate against single people and against LGBTQ people, and so that's why it cannot be used. And so again, there's people's rights and freedoms in Canada can be exercised within reasonable limits, but you also can't infringe on or take away other people's rights in the process of exercising your own. So in this case, the Christians at Trinity Western University are very welcome to adhere to their faith, believe what they want, and to act in accordance with those beliefs. That is all protected, but they are not allowed to discriminate on the basis of their beliefs. Okay, and so that's what the Supreme Court had ruled. So today, who else is here now? Manish is here. Good morning, Manish. Ivan's here. Hello, Ivan. Hello, Tika. Caleb's here. Good morning. Caleb, yes, you can. Please and thank you. And Chan is here. Good morning, Chan. Okay, so that brings us to classism. Okay, and so I'll start out classism with a few slides here. So when we're talking about social class, sometimes we're talking about a collection of different things. Okay, so class is a sociological term that describes how we rank ourselves, how we order ourselves in society in terms of power or respect or status. And so people can be in a higher class than us or a lower class than us based on their income, so how much money they make, based on their overall wealth, based on their status, and their status can come from their occupation, or it can come from their looks, or it can come from their family last name. In some countries in the past, it came from caste. And there's also, class can also relate to political power as well. So if we look at these three gentlemen here, who you will probably recognize, I hope you recognize at least two of these guys. On the left here, you'll see Microsoft founder Bill Gates, who has more money than God, basically. I don't know how much money he has, but it's a huge amount. Here in the center, we have the Dalai Lama. And here on the right, we have, of course, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And so all of these guys have status. They are in an upper class of people, but they're all kind of in that upper class for different reasons, right? Bill Gates is in that upper class because of his financial power. So he created Microsoft and Windows and all kinds of things. And so Bill is super, super, super rich. And so he belongs in the upper class because of his wealth, because of some other things too, but mostly because of his wealth, how much money he has and how much money he's made. The Dalai Lama here in the middle The Dalai Lama doesn't really make any money, right? The Dalai Lama is a spiritual and to some degree political leader as well of Tibet. And the Dalai Lama has social power, right? So he doesn't have a huge sum of money. He doesn't really have a lot of world political power, but he has social power. People respect him, people honor him, and in most places in the world, when the Dalai Lama says something, people tend to listen to him, right? So he has a lot of social power. And here on the far right, we have Justin Trudeau. And Justin Trudeau, of course, most of his power comes from his political office, right? He's the Prime Minister of Canada, and that's where his power comes from. Now, he has some other types of power too. He does come from a reasonably wealthy family, so his family has some economic power, some financial power. But he also has a name, and so again, if you know anything about Canadian history, you'll know that his father, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, was the Prime Minister of Canada in the 1970s, and he was a bit of a rock star Prime Minister at the time. A lot of people were very excited about Pierre Elliott Trudeau. So Justin Trudeau here has a little bit of name recognition as well. So he has some social status, some social power. He has a little bit of financial power. His family is reasonably wealthy, but most of his power is political, right? As Prime Minister of Canada. So again, people can be in upper classes, but they can be there for different reasons. And again, they can have different combinations of political and social and financial power. So what we'll be talking about here is classism, right? And classism is the systematic oppression of poor and working class people by those who are not poor and not working class, people who have lots of money. And in general, people who have lots and lots of money control the necessary resources that people in the lower economic classes need. So jobs, wages, education, housing, food, medicine, many of these are controlled or administered by the upper class, right? And so we have an upper class that has advantages and privileges and opportunities that the lower class does not have. And again, those opportunities and advantages come from their higher class, whether it's social or financial or political. Now, one of the things that we should remember about class is that, very similar to race, class is socially constructed, okay, to some degree anyway. And it was something really that is connected to the birth of agriculture. And so this should connect, for those of you who are in comparative cultures, this should connect to Jared Diamond's article on the worst mistake in the history of the human race. But it should also connect to our discussion of hunter-gatherers and sexism, right? When we were talking about why women tend to be in, why women tend to have less power in many societies. But if we go back to hunter-gatherers thousands of years ago, there really isn't such a thing as class. Everyone basically has the same status. People are treated differently depending on your gender, right? So men and women are still treated a little differently. Age is another factor as well, right? You treat little children differently than teenagers and differently than adults and differently than respected elders. But really there's no such thing as social class, and there's definitely no such thing as economic class amongst hunter-gatherers, because hunter-gatherers share all their things. And so there's really no wealth to be had. Nobody has more money than anyone else because there is no money. So classism is something that comes out of agriculture and comes out of civilization. So it's not necessarily a natural thing. It's a part of culture and society. Yeah, so this is just a slide referencing that earlier discussion we had during sexism when we talked about agriculture being connected to gender inequality but it also is connected to economic inequality. So in many societies that practice intensive agriculture, a property owning class emerges, right? So people start to be able to own the land, and then you have people who own land and people who don't, right? And people who own land tend to be able to enrich themselves by getting others to work on their land for them. And then they are able to sort of put themselves above others. And of course, that system extends all the way to the modern world, right? Where we have some people who are at the upper levels of society and have more money and power than the rest of us do. Now, one of the ways of looking at this, and I thought I would just kind of throw this in here as a bonus, because Karl Marx here you will not get away from. If you go on to university and you go into philosophy or sociology or anthropology or psychology, you just cannot get away from Karl Marx. His ideas have spread, political science as well. His ideas have spread far and wide, and so there's really no avoiding him. And so Karl Marx, of course, is the founder of socialism. His ideas will be borrowed by Vladimir Lenin, and the Soviet Union will be created based on the ideas of Marx, and arguably all other communist nations as well: Vietnam, China, North Korea to some degree, Cuba. All of those countries' economic system of socialism comes out of the writing of Karl Marx. And Marx was around at a period of rapid industrialization. So in the 1800s, in sort of Western Europe, countries like Britain and France were rapidly industrializing. So they were building machines and factories and automating manufacturing and creating massive amounts of products. This process of industrialization made countries like Britain and France and so on very, very wealthy, very, very quickly, and put them in a position to be dominant powers on the globe, even though they're pretty small countries, arguably, but they gained their power economically through the process of industrialization. But what Karl Marx pointed out during this period of industrialization, because he was around, he was there watching it, was that he described it as a struggle between two social groups. The bourgeoisie, who were the property-owning class, so the people who owned land and owned factories and machines and things like that. And then there were the proletariat, and the proletariat were the workers, right? The people who go to the factories and go to the shops and work for an hourly wage in order to get a paycheck. And so Karl Marx saw these two groups, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, as constantly locked in struggle, right? The proletariat, they depended on each other, right? The proletariat needed the bourgeoisie to open factories so that they would have a place to live or a place to work and make money. But of course, the bourgeoisie needed proletariats. They needed workers to work in their factories so that they would make money. So these two social groups are kind of locked in struggle. They both need each other, but they have different goals, right? The bourgeoisie is trying to pay the workers as little as possible in order to make as much profit as possible. And of course, the proletariat, the workers, are trying to get wages as high as possible and to work the least and have sort of more safety rules usually. So these two social groups oppose each other and oppose each other in an industrial situation, but again, they both need each other as well. So Karl Marx was watching this and he said that, well, this is an exploitive system, right? The proletariat are being exploited by the bourgeoisie, right? The factory owners are exploiting the workers because the workers are working all day long, right? For a whole year, let's say. And the profit that comes from their work, the the profit that comes from the sale of whatever they're manufacturing, it doesn't go back to them, right? It goes to the factory owner. The factory owner is the one who takes all the profit of these people's work, and these people are paid an hourly wage regardless of how successful the company might be. And so, again, Karl Marx saw this as exploitation. And so what he was arguing for was socialism, right? He said that a system where the people, the proletariat, were the ones that owned the means of production, so the people owning the factories and the machines and the stores, would allow everyone to share in the profits. Everyone would get an equal share, and that would actually be fair. And so again, that's kind of the system that you see in communist societies, right? And again, not all communist countries are currently like that. Some of them have borrowed little bits of capitalism to help move things along. So places like Vietnam and places like China have borrowed pieces of capitalism and put it into their socialist system in order to sort of stimulate productivity. But again, Marx saw this in terms of in these two opposing groups, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, battling for, trying to get more from the other. And again, Marx saw this as an exploitive system for the proletariat, and that they needed to overthrow these factory owners and take control of the factories themselves so that they could split the profits equally. Yeah. Right. So Karl Marx saw capitalism as an exploitive system, and it's a system that's based on inequality, right? So inequality is baked right into capitalism. And so if you want more, you have to work harder or compete with the people around you, right? You've got to be more productive, you've got to be smarter or faster or better in order to get more and more and more. So capitalism is a competitive system, and it's built on the fact that not everyone will get an equal share, right? You have to fight for your share. You have to compete for it. Now, this is capitalism is the economic system in most market democracies. Capitalism is, in most market democracies, we have a capitalist system. Now, some countries have a more capitalist approach, which means that the government doesn't regulate the market very much, and they stay out of market affairs and let it kind of run itself. And then there are countries that more closely monitor the economy and involve themselves in it. And then there are countries that have little elements of socialism as well. And so this is a bit of an aside, but that's one of the places where the US and Canada differ a bit. Canada has a much stronger socialist presence in the way it does things. So if you think about our healthcare system, for instance, if you're a citizen of Canada, the MSP thing aside, if you're a citizen of Canada, you get free healthcare, right? Your healthcare is paid for. So if you go to the hospital, they're not going to give you a bill for thousands of dollars when you get out. Everything is paid for by our taxes, and so we all pay into the healthcare system with our taxes, and then we all get what we need, right? And that's a very socialist idea, the healthcare system here in Canada. But again, that's okay with Canadians. Canadians like their healthcare system, and Canadians are okay with a little bit of socialism mixed into their capitalism. If you go to the States, they are far less comfortable with any kind of socialism. They're far more capitalistic, On average, people want the government to stay out of the economy, whereas here in Canada, we're more comfortable with the government intervening in the economy. And again, that's a little more toward a socialist idea. Again, we can get deeper into that, but maybe I'll just leave it. I'll leave it there. Oh, yeah, sorry. Right. So classism is this system where people at the top of society, people that have more wealth or power or status, are able to have advantages and opportunities and benefits that the rest of us don't have. And so this system of inequalities, which is called classism, is held in place by a number of beliefs. Okay, so just like racism and sexism have social messages that that transmit stereotypes and allow inequality to continue, so too does classism have stereotypes and prejudices and ideologies that allow this inequality to persist. Okay, so people are ranked according to economic status, right? Breeding, occupation, and levels of education. So think about it. Do we respect people who have lots of money? And often we That's okay. That's okay, Erica. Is anyone else having an issue? I'm just gonna go to my YouTube dashboard here and see what's happening. Wonder what's going on. Casey says it's fine. Chris is having some issues. Okay. I wonder what's going on. Something weird has definitely happened with YouTube, and I'm not sure. Like, it's connected to the problems from yesterday. Interesting. It's very strange. Okay, well, unfortunately, I don't know why that is, but I'm gonna keep going, okay? Because there's nothing. Okay, it seems like for some people it's okay. For those of you who it's not, I don't know what's happening, and I don't know how to fix it. So I'm gonna keep going. At least it'll be recorded, and so if you need to go back and look at something, you can, okay? So I have sympathy for you, but I don't know how to fix it, so I'm just gonna keep going. I'm glad you let me know. But yeah, I'm not sure what to do about it, so I'm just gonna keep going, okay? And we'll just keep our fingers crossed. Right, okay. So right, so if you think about it, we often look up to people who have lots of money, right? So rich people are often, we give them status, we give them respect, we give them prestige, right? Poor people, generally, we don't have a lot of respect for, right? We don't look up to and idolize people who are poor, usually, right? I'm sure you can think of exceptions. I'm sure you can think of poor people who are worthy of people's respect, not worthy, but who get people's respect, and I'm sure you can think of rich people that nobody likes. That's easy. But in general, society tends to look up to people with money, right? Similarly, occupation. Some occupations are more prestigious than others, right? If you are a pop star or a hockey player or a race car driver or a movie star, those are all occupations that get a lot of social prestige. If you are a guy who drives the garbage truck every morning, that doesn't get a lot of social prestige, right? And of course, we need that guy to take away the garbage, but it's not a highly respected occupation, right? Similarly, education, right? Different levels of education are respected differently as well. If you get your associate degree from Columbia College, that's great. If you get a degree from Harvard or Yale or Oxford, that's a totally different thing, right? And that's, no insult to Columbia College, but those are just two different things, right? Those degrees are respected more. So we give respect and status to different things, different people, and it tends to be people with more money, with certain types of occupations, with certain types of education, and in some cases with particular family names, right? Or names with kind of a history. And again, who says, right? Who gets to say who should be respected? Who decides what universities are respected and which ones aren't? Who decides what occupations are cool and which ones aren't? Who decides what kinds of clothes are fashionable and therefore expensive and which ones aren't? Well, the upper class does, because the upper class is the dominant group, right? The dominant group decides what's normal. The dominant group decides what is desirable. And so when we see things like this, these are all things that are connected to higher classes, either economic or social classes, right? So you see big fancy villas, you see people drinking martinis in tuxedos, you see flashy cars like this, you see a guy drinking whiskey and smoking a cigar in a leather chair with his fancy suit and bow tie on. See people playing golf, although golf is not quite as elite as it used to be. All of these things are seen as elements of upper class life, right? And for many of us, they're things that we aspire to, right? We aspire to have a fancy car like this, or maybe have a really nice house, or be able to sort of sit around drinking expensive whiskey and smoking cigars, or maybe going on golf holidays all the time. These things are things that many of us aspire to. And again, they're connected to higher social classes. Again, if you look at stuff like this, these are all evidence of lower class. These are lower class activities, right? So we have some wrestling here, which is generally not an upper class activity or pastime. It's a lower class thing. Here we have some really cheap malt liquor. Again, these things are very kind of low class beverages. Reality shows, these are the guys from the Jersey Shore number of years ago, but there's always reality shows that are kind of trashy and lower class. Country music in many cases is seen as lower class. And you can see this guy's car that he has customized with cardboard. It's a very low class thing to do. But again, the dominant group decides what's cool and what's not, right? What's worthy of respect and what's not. And again, in this case, the dominant group is the people with money. And again, so where do these ideas come from? Well, again, they come from our socialization and from our enculturation. They get passed on through our culture, they get passed on through media, and they get passed on through the education system. We transmit messages about classism very effectively in all these ways. One of the ideologies that supports this, we'll take a break in just a minute here, guys. One of the ideologies that supports this that supports classism is meritocracy. And I think we've talked about this before. This is an ideology that says that success is achieved on the basis of a person's talent, effort, and achievement, right? So the ideology of meritocracy says that if you see someone who is in a position of power or wealth, that must mean that they worked really, really hard, and that's why they're there, right? And if you see someone who is not successful or is not very wealthy, then meritocracy says, well, that's because they're not working hard enough. They need to get their life together, pull up their boots, and get to work, right? Because anybody can do it. That's meritocracy. But even though it's a very strong belief in Western society, and probably in many others as well, it has an element of truth, right? If you want to be a lawyer, you're going to have to do some work, right? You have to study, you have to pass your exams. It's not easy, right? But meritocracy is not the full story, right? And again, if you look at someone like Donald Trump, for instance, he's a perfect example of the fact that that we are not living in a meritocracy, right? If you look at his history, he has inherited a huge sum of money from his father's business. His own business dealings have been reasonably unsuccessful or somewhat successful. He managed to become president of the United States, even though he doesn't really have any education or experience that allows him to do it. He doesn't seem to work very hard at it. There were recently some memos that were leaked on his schedule, and he's got big sections of time in his schedule where he's just doing nothing. I think he's just watching TV and tweeting. So, Donald Trump might be held up as evidence of meritocracy, but he's clearly not, right? He's gotten where he is because he comes from a rich family who has rich and powerful friends. He went to the right school, even though he may have cheated on his exams. And he kind of bullied his way into the White House. And now that he's there, he's not really working very hard either. He's kind of screwing it up. And so, again, we have this idea that people become successful by working hard. And again, sometimes that's true. And to be successful, most of the time you have to work hard, but that's not always the case. Other things can make people successful as well. Individualism. This is another important ideology here. The ideology that the individual is the basic unit of society, and that people can have the freedom to make their own choices and behave as they choose. And so one of the things that we've talked about in this class is the idea that, yes, we're all unique individuals, right? You and I are our own people, right? And we choose to live our lives the way we want, but we're also members of society, right? And we're members of different social groups. And depending on the social groups that you belong to, society will treat you differently. You will have different experiences, different advantages, different opportunities. And so, again, even though we're all unique individuals, it doesn't mean that society sees us all as unique. Society sees us as belonging to particular groups, and again, that affects how we are. That affects our experience, right? Okay. Whew. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, I'll ask you those questions from the video we watched, and I think I have another video that I'd like to show you that you may find interesting as well. But take 10, stretch your legs, and I'll see you very shortly. Okay, people, and we're back. Hopefully, we're back anyway. So, yeah. So of course we seem to have some video transmission problems here. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on, but hopefully it'll be okay. Let's see. Where were we? Oh yeah. Excuse me. So we were talking about some. We're talking about some of the things that allow classism to continue. Okay, and so I think I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit if it's okay with you. Okay. I'm going to jump ahead just a bit. So, some of the ideas that are behind classism are these. And again, some of these are kind of American ideas. You may have heard of them before, you may not have heard of them before. But you can kind of let me know maybe if they sound familiar to you. One of the myths or one of the messages that circulate around Western society is that Western society is classless, right? That anybody can make it if you just have talent and work hard. This is kind of the essence of the American dream, right? The idea that anyone can come to America and anyone can make it. Anyone can be successful. And of course, there are lots of stories that fit into this narrative. There's lots of people who come to America or come from poverty or from lower class or disadvantaged situations, and they make it. They become successful in America. And there's lots of these kind of rags to riches sorts of stories floating around. Even fictional ones like Cinderella, right? Cinderella is a perfect rags to riches story. She starts out as, basically a slave in her stepmother's house, and she winds up a princess, right? And so there are lots of these sort of ideologies circulating around Western society. But again, they are very, very rare. Most of the time, at least in America and sometimes in Canada, if you are born into poverty, if you're born into a poor family, in many cases you're going to remain poor for the rest of your life. It's going to be very hard for you to dig out of that. So again, in the US, only 6% of children born to parents in the very lowest economic class will rise to the top. And so for many, many people, the American dream will not happen for them. And again, of the 10 richest people in the US, all of them are white men, and nearly all of them were born into wealthy families. And so if you think about that, their children are going to have all kinds of opportunities that people in the bottom levels of society will not have, right? We'll need to know this too. There's some other ideologies here. There's some other ideas about class and meritocracy and the nature of work that help to hold classism in place as well. So there's this idea out there that a rich person can become poor as easily as a poor person can become rich. And again, this is not true. It seems like it should be true, and it's an appealing thought, of course, but it's based on the idea that being rich and being poor is simply a factor of having money or not having money. But in reality, the person who is rich has all kinds of different things that they can use, even if they lose all of their money, right? They have something called cultural capital. Okay, they might have their education, they might have a network of friends who can help them, they might have a good credit history, their family name might be known at the, in banks and in sort of political circles. They might have assets, right? They might still own things that they can use to get loans from the bank. And so a rich person who loses all of their money is in a much better situation to become rich again, whereas a poor person is going to find it very, very difficult to not remain poor, because again, they don't have all of the things that the rich person has. And so if you take a rich person and a poor person and you take away all their money, they're not starting at the same place. The rich person is still ahead because of all of the cultural capital and education and connections that they have. And so they're much more likely to become successful again, whereas the poor person will struggle even to regain what they once had. Okay, so here's where I'm going to jump ahead. So I had you watch this video, and I had you watch it simply to show you a couple of things. First of all, the idea that people have an idea of how wealth and money are distributed in society, right? And that's that bar in the middle. That's what people think is happening. And so even though they know it's not ideal, they don't really see the depth of the problem, right? They don't see quite how unequal American society actually is. And again, not all societies are like this. Some societies are much more equal than others. But the US is actually particularly unequal, significantly unequal. And again, it's unequal to the point where most people it's significant to the point where most people don't really seem to understand how rich the richest people are and how poor the poorest people are as well. And you saw in the graphic, you saw in the video, that a significant number of people are living below the poverty line. And the poverty line, measuring the poverty line varies depending on what country you're in. But basically it means that you cannot afford the basics of life. It means that you cannot afford food and clothing and shelter. You do not have enough money to do even those things. And so there are millions of Americans who are living below the poverty line. They don't have just the basic necessities of life. Okay, and then I had you watch this video here, and I did ask you a couple questions, and maybe I'll ask them to you now. So what are these 5 causes of economic inequality that the video lists? Okay, so Mashid says technological change is one of them. And so basically what this is automation, right? The fact that technology can do the jobs that people used to do, okay? And so most of these jobs are manual labor. Many of them are in manufacturing. Some of them are in clerical administrative work. But in many cases, we see machines taking the place of human workers. And we've seen this for a long time, right? There's lots of robots in factories. If you go to Shoppers Drug Mart or Save On Foods or wherever, you can go to the automatic checkout, right? And the automatic checkout is basically a computer, a machine taking the place of a cashier. And so technological change has meant that many people who used to do certain jobs are not needed anymore because the machine can do them either more cheaply or more effectively or both, right? And so those people who used to work in those occupations now have been pushed out. the thing that's connected to that, is globalization, right? So countries have increased their level of global trade to a greater degree than ever before, and so lots of manufacturing jobs have gone from the U.S. and from other sort of G7 countries to other countries, right? So a massive amount of the world's goods are made in China and Southeast Asia now, and of course those manufacturing jobs have moved there because they are because the labor is cheaper, and because China has given them tax incentives. And so as a result, it's made countries like China very economically prosperous. But in the US, it has created a hole in the economy, right? Because there were all of these manufacturing jobs that people who didn't go to university but finished high school could work at. They were semi-skilled and they could make a decent living, right? But again, those jobs are now gone. They've been replaced by machines, or those jobs have gone to China or wherever. And so jobs and that middle class life, those people have kind of slid down, and now they're in jobs that require fewer skills and therefore get paid less money, right? So as those jobs have moved overseas, the middle class has kind of slid into a lower economic class. And so technological change, so automation and globalization, have both a role to play there. We have the rise of superstars, right? So we have global companies now that make massive profits, right? If you create Apple computers and you're only selling computers and technological products to the US and Canada, there's really only so much money you can make. But if you can sell your products to the entire world, and you can try to get everybody to own an iPhone, suddenly you can make massive amounts of money, right? And so companies like Apple, companies that are present around the world, that are sort of transnational corporations, they make massive amounts of money. And so the people who work in the higher levels of management similarly make massive amounts of money. The video also talks about failing labor, right? So the idea that unions that used to advocate for workers' rights and workers' salaries have disappeared, right? And again, trade unions were connected to those manufacturing jobs that existed in the United States and Canada a few decades ago. But again, as those jobs disappeared, so too did trade unions, right? And so nowadays there's no one advocating for workers' rights and workers' salaries. The last one was seizing the advantage, and I forget what they said about that. I forget what they said about that last one. Do I have a slide on it? Maybe I do. Hang on. Oh, maybe I don't. Okay, I think we've got most of them. So here you can see a similar graphic to what we saw in some of the videos, where CEOs, so chief economic, what's it stand for? CEO? Chief Executive Officer, sorry. CEOs, so the chief executive officer of these massive corporations, their compensation has been going up and up and up and up and up for the past few decades. And so in the 1980s, a CEO of a corporation might make 33 times as much as the average worker. But here you can see, as we move into the 2000s, CEOs are making hundreds of times what their average worker is earning, right? So massive amounts of inequality, not only within society, but also within also within companies themselves. And again, you can see that this is a global problem. Some countries are doing a little bit better in terms of equality between CEO compensation and regular worker compensation. But some countries, as you can see in the United States, are wildly unequal. So look at that. Canadian CEOs make roughly 20 times what their average worker makes. But in the US, up to 475 times. That's a massive, massive inequality. And that brings me to this. Okay. So what I'd like you to do, good people, is I would like you to watch this video, okay? And so we have about 15 minutes left, and this video is about 15 minutes long. So what I'll ask you to do, I'm just going to post this in Microsoft Teams. I'm going to post it in Microsoft Teams, and I'll let you watch the video, and I think I've just got 2 or 3 simple questions for you. And Rutger Bregman will talk about poverty. He'll talk about what his perspective on it is. And I want you to answer the questions, but also pay attention to the ways in which the things that he says, the things that Rutger Bregman says, are in contradiction to some of the ideologies that we have absorbed about poverty, okay? So pay attention when you watch the video to things that kind of trigger you, things that kind of like, make you want to say, no, Rutger, you're wrong. Pay attention to those things, because those are ideologies that we've absorbed, and he is going to contradict a few of them in his talk. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll ask you to watch the video, answer the questions, and then that's what we'll pick up first thing tomorrow. Okay, so go ahead, watch the video, answer the questions, and I'll see you first thing tomorrow morning, and we'll discuss it. Okay, so go watch it. See you tomorrow. Bye.